if you just do it, it turned out okay. And welcome to the very first broadcast on my brand new PC. Hopefully, the lagging and stuff is a thing of the past. Knock on wood.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. But today, we are here to talk about the Articles of Confederation and why they failed miserably. The precursor to the Constitution. So do you have an idea why they failed?
Well, because they weren't really capable of succeeding. They were destined to fail because it turns out that you can't run a country on them.
Yes.
It put a whole bunch of responsibility on the federal government and gave it absolutely no authority.
And that fight's still going on today, really. We'll talk about that in a bit.
Yeah.
But you have an article you can screen share?
I've got the Wikipedia up because that's the simple way of doing it.
All right.
We'll go.
Put it up.
Yeah, hold on. Let me see if they link to the full text because that would be better.
Yes.
They have the original parchment, but I don't want the original parchment. I want something legible.
What, you can't read 18th century script?
I can, but it's all fading.
This one's for the audio box right here.
There we go. Transcript. Here we go. Okay. So let me share screen. Select. I think we're going to be doing screenception for a second here, but bear with me.
All right.
We got it?
Yes.
All right.
Make it a little bigger?
I can try. View. Zoom. There we go.
Yeah, make it a little bit bigger. Goodbye, chat. sorry, chat. No chat script for you. Yeah, that's much better. I can see it now.
Okay.
So what's the history of the articles?
So at about the same time as the Declaration of Independence, they realized they did need some form of federal, for lack of a better word, government because, new country, new government. And within a year, they had hashed this out. Now, they didn't want to give the federal government any more power than the king and parliament had previously had. But as you may recall, one of the issues was that the king and parliament were trying to run the colonies without any real authority or anybody wanting to pay taxes or anything like that.
Yep.
So it was basically 13 separate groups trying to control things while at the same time not allowing anyone to control them.
Yeah, so basically it's 13 separate countries working together.
Right.
Kind
of. Right. And without anyone else's bad example of doing the same thing. And I think that's a really important aspect is, you get things like the EU and the UN and so forth. And first off, they're not really controlling countries. But second, they have seen the Articles of Confederation fail. So they know some of the things that you have to step in and say, no, we're not doing it that way. We're doing it this other way.
And so each state wanted their own, had all the power, and that and they didn't want to like answer anybody else.
The states didn't necessarily want to control each other. They just didn't want anyone to control them.
That's what I meant.
Yeah. So you get, the one that was most trigger happy on their veto power was Rhode Island.
The smallest state.
The smallest one. Because, as we'll get to, every single colony, for lack of a better term, they still weren't really states, had a full veto over anything that got passed.
Yeah. And if 12 agreed and one didn't, fail.
Right. And I went to a liberal hippie college, and all student organization decisions were supposed to be reached by consensus. And I am here to tell you, you can hardly figure out what you're going to have for dinner if everybody has to agree. Much less how you're going to run a country.
And this was the government we had during the revolution.
Yes. Yeah. It lasted about 10 years. The articles were passed in 1777 and were going to be overhauled, was the official claim, in 1787 when the delegates sat down for what would become the Constitutional Convention. Because they knew that overhauling was not enough.
Yeah, I think we might have talked about it. We did the Constitution thing, but it's like they came in like okay, they looked at it like no, this is impossible.
No. You can't run a country this way.
Yeah. Now, a lot of let's start with the beginning of this so far.
Mm-hmm. So we go. To all whom these presents shall come, we, the undersigned delegates of the states affixed to our names, send greeting. Which is just such a homey way to begin. I like that. Whereas the delegates of the United States of America in Congress assembled did on the 15th day of November in the year of our Lord 1777, and in the second year of the independence of America, agree to certain articles of confederation and perpetual union. Let's pause here a second. Even with the articles of confederation, they were very clear on, but you don't get to just walk away.
All right.
It's like once you're in, you're in.
Once you're in, you're in. The United States Confederacy, 90 odd years later, would actually include that in their own articles of confederation, despite the fact that they were themselves breaking away from the country. It's a whole thing. Between the states of New Hampshire, one word, Massachusetts Bay, Rhode Island. I don't know if these one words are from the original or just how this was transcribed, but it's kind of entertaining. Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, the full name of Rhode Island. Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia in the words following, viz. Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union between the states of, we just went over this bit. Article 1, the style of this confederacy shall be the United States of America. This is the first time that was officially the name of the country. In 1776, which we have talked about a few times before, they give the custodian of the Congress the line that he doesn't like it as the name of a country. And I kind of agree with him. Because there's no good adjective form. In Spanish, which is the only language other than English which I have any kind of fluency, it's Estado Unidencio or something along those lines, where you have to say basically United Statesian. Because the only alternative is American. which,
Oh, yeah.
kind of leaves out most of the inhabitants of the continents of North and South America.
Yeah.
It was not a well-chosen name. We should have picked something else.
That one is, yeah.
Article 2. Each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right which is not by this confederation expressly delegated to the United States in Congress assembled. Basically, if the Articles of Confederation don't explicitly say the Congress has that authority, then the state retains that authority. And one of the problems they were already starting to have was that the states were enforcing tariffs against one another and joining one another for, we have a free trade pact between, like New Hampshire and Massachusetts, but it's against the Carolinas. So they have to pay these tariffs that these other states don't. And it was this whole complicated thing, and that was still perfectly fine under the Articles of Confederation, even though it was already a problem.
So yeah, it's sovereignty. So it like I said before, it's its own power.
Yeah, I don't think there was even a Supreme Court yet. Like, there was no ultimate authority vested in the American government.
Speaking of the Supreme Court, if I'm not mistaken, the very first quote president of this Congress was later this first Supreme Court justice.
He was on the Supreme Court, but yeah, and you get a lot of people like, oh, he was really the first president of the United States. No, he wasn't.
Like I said, quote Congress president.
Yeah, I just want to clarify for anyone who's listening. He was absolutely not the first president of the United States, because basically his job was, and we don't technically have one of these at the moment, he was Speaker of the House. Or
a house with no power at all.
Right. Or if you prefer, President Pro Tem of the Senate. He was in charge of the Congress,
which had no power at all. He was not considered a spokesman for the United States as a whole. He didn't have, he wasn't commander-in-chief of the army. He had nothing except the responsibility for being in charge of Congress. So if anybody ever tries to tell you that we really had all of these presidents before George Washington, they really do not fundamentally understand the government. And it's worth noting that we had something like 8 of them in the 10 years that the Articles of Confederation were the authority of the government. Very high turnover rate. And I'm sure part of that was, war. But part of it was also, it was just a thankless job. Article 3, the said states hereby severally enter into a firm league of friendship with each other for their common defense, the security of their liberties, and their mutual and general welfare, binding themselves to assist each other against all force offered to or attacks made upon them, or any of them, on account of religion, sovereignty, trade, or any other pretense whatsoever. Basically, we are allies. You attack one of us, you've attacked all of us. It's just one good thing here.
This is basically establishing, it is all one country. Appearances notwithstanding. And at the time, that was a really important consideration. People do not, I think, fully realize how fragile the United States was in these early years. We had just beaten the British, but that was by the skin of our teeth and through the aid of the French. And if the French decided to change their minds and go after us, who was going to help us? The English? We were basically surrounded on all sides, well, except west, but by,
united forces considerably more powerful.
The nitro must not be plugged in.
In theory, the Louisiana Territory was to our west and owned by the French, but
So plug that in.
that theory is doing a lot of work there. In practice, that was still controlled by Native American groups that weren't allied with one another most of the time.
This one right here. Plug it right here.
But to the south, you have Mexico and Florida and New Orleans, and the powers of the Caribbean, and to the east, you've got the Atlantic and all of the European powers across the Atlantic, and to the north, you've got Canada.
Okay, now we're going to get the PS49.
And it would have been trivially easy for, the Spanish to invade Georgia. And so it was basically saying, yeah, they could do that, and then we will all fight together.
And now that was in writing. How was that in practice? So were they at the time? Were they helping each other? Or were they like, oh, this is my business?
Well, in practice, most of the struggles were internal. The Spanish didn't try to invade Georgia. There were a couple of rebellions that were actually part of what led to the need for the Constitution. The most famous being Shays's Rebellion. And basically the consensus of the states was, it doesn't count. We don't have to help you with your internal stuff, just the external stuff.
Like if someone else was invaded, like if England came over, France came over, and yeah, we're on your side, but yeah, this is a Massachusetts problem.
Yeah, exactly. So in practice, it didn't really come up much.
And the Shay Rebellion, that's one of the issues that came up with this, because they had no power to stop the city. They had no power to stop the rebellion.
Nobody could go in and say, hey, we're kind of trying to have a country here, because in practical terms they weren't. In practical terms, they were trying to remain states. 13 countries in a trench coat. Article 4, which is a long one, so we'll do it in chunks, I think is the best way to do this. The better to secure and perpetuate mutual friendship and intercourse in the old-fashioned sense among the people of the different states in this union, the free inhabitants, emphasis on free, of these states, paupers, vagabonds, and fugitives from justice accepted, which kind of makes me think these rights did not necessarily apply to, me, because I think I would have counted as a pauper.
So like basically like the voting rights, which is for rich land.
Yeah, well, this is
landowning whites.
This is basically, if you aren't in power enough to have a say in Congress, these rights don't necessarily apply to you. It wasn't necessarily about being rich, but definitely landowners and what have you. As a woman, they definitely didn't apply to me, but as a poor person relying on a government handout, essentially, I probably wouldn't be considered to have a lot of these rights. Hold on a sec, yes, dear? Not right now, okay? Not right now. Sorry, my daughter wanted to ask me a question. Shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of free citizens in the several states. Basically, you have rights in one state, you've got rights in all of them. And the people of each state shall have free ingress and regress to and from any other state. You are allowed to go back and forth between the states without needing passports and what have you. The pauper thing makes me wonder if I would be allowed to visit my mother in Oregon
if we were still under the Articles of Confederation.
Plug it back in. I keep hearing it. Plug it into that.
And shall enjoy therein all the privileges of trade and commerce, subject
Oh,
to
so
the
wait, so wait a minute. You would need a passport to go from state to state, basically.
I mean, basically, this is saying you don't need a passport to go from
Okay.
state
I
to
just want
state.
to make sure. I can
Yeah,
hear it.
like we're all one unit, like the EU. You know, you don't need a passport to go between EU countries. You have the right of free travel from, you know, France to Germany. It was the same basic principle here.
But why you say you can't go to Oregon then?
Well, I'm saying, you know, because this doesn't apply to paupers. Doesn't
Okay.
apply to paupers,
so
vagabonds.
So only
Right.
landowners could go from state to state, no problem. But us poor people were like they'd have a little bit more trouble going from Massachusetts to New York or something.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know how much they enforce the paupers need. You know, paupers don't get these rights. For one thing, traveling between a lot of the states would have been fairly expensive at the time.
And slow, because the fastest thing is horses.
Right. Like, traveling, you know, around New England is one thing because a lot of those states are smaller, but traveling in the South would have been a very long, very slow, very expensive process.
And this is even pre trains.
Yeah, this is pre-train. This is before pre-consistent stagecoach lines in a lot of places.
Yep, see, look at that.
Like most of the paupers would be traveling on, as the saying goes, Shanks's mare, which means on foot. And even traveling from North Carolina to South Carolina on foot, unless you're already right at the border, is going to take you some time. Let's see. And shall enjoy therein all the privileges of trade and commerce, because that was a you know, while one of the big struggles in the early days of the country was not technically between slave owner and non-slave owner, though in practice there was a lot of overlap. It was really between town and country, you know, between farmers and city people, manufacturing and trade. But they were definitely enshrining trade in the Articles of Confederation because it was really important, and they knew that, even if they were all snobbish about it. Subject to the same duties, impositions, and restrictions as the inhabitants thereof, respectively. Basically, you got to follow the law of Pennsylvania, even if you're from Virginia. If you're in Pennsylvania. Provided that such restrictions shall not extend so far as to prevent the removal of property imported into any state to any other state of which the owner is an inhabitant. Which I suspect is basically saying you can't force someone to free their slaves just because they've moved to a different state.
That's nothing, right?
Like, that's me reading between lines, but it does not strike me as an unreasonable reading between lines. Because anytime they're really clear about things like removal of property, that's usually a euphemism for slaves.
I'm gonna download Chrome.
Provided also that no imposition, duties, or restrictions shall be laid by any state on the property of the United States or either of them. Basically, that's a tax thing again. You can't tax people who are just visiting your state, really. You know, you can't make the taxes of your state apply to people from other states. And you can't take away their slaves. And those are the two things that were very, very important to a lot of the people in charge of writing these documents. If any person guilty of or charged with treason, felony, or other high misdemeanor in any state shall flee from justice and be found in any of the United States. You notice that United States is lowercase a lot of the time here. Because they're not really referring to it as a country.
Because we were like united in the loosest sense of the term.
Right. What they're saying here is, from one state to a next, not the country. Because they didn't really think of it in terms of a country yet.
Yeah, wasn't that where they after Civil War they changed the R to is?
Yeah. One of the big changes to the Civil War was in grammar. The United States went from being a plural to being a singular after we'd only been a country for, 90 years, give or take. He shall, upon demand of the governor or executive power of the state from which he fled, be delivered up and removed to the state having jurisdiction of his offense. You can't get away from your crimes by crossing state lines. At least theoretically. In practical terms, it varied a lot based on how much you kept your head down and how famous you were. If I, for example, had robbed somebody and fled from New York to South Carolina and stayed quiet and didn't do anything and never came to anybody's attention, I probably wouldn't have gotten extradited simply because the logistics of knowing who I was were so complicated. Because I was not somebody whose face everyone would have known. If I changed my name, you couldn't even track me by name. It was really easy to escape your crimes by traveling 50 miles in those days. But in theory, if somebody did recognize me and say, hey, that's Jillian, she, beat up my mom and took $50 from her, then yeah, I could be extradited back to where I had done the crime, and the state that I was in would be forced to help with that. Full faith and credit shall be given in each of these states to the records, acts, and judicial proceedings of the courts and magistrates of every other state. So, if you're convicted of a crime in one, then that's considered to be valid in others. If you're married in one, your marriage is legal in other states. If you write out your will in one, then your will is considered binding in the other states. Legal documents follow you, and the states have to acknowledge them.
Now, what's a magistrate?
Magistrate is basically a judge.
Okay, so the old term for judge.
Yeah. It's from Latin magister, I think it is, which is just something along the lines of authority. And it's basically somebody in power, but in practical terms, it's a judge.
Okay.
Article 5, which is another long one. For the more convenient management of the general interests of the United States, which I just love. Yeah, we're just making this convenient. Delegates shall be annually appointed in such manner as the legislature of each state shall direct. So, if you recall from the Constitution was very clear on, and here's how we're doing this, and how many representatives each state is entitled to, and blah, blah, blah. Articles of Confederation is like, yeah, you guys should have a delegation. That's important. To meet in Congress on the first Monday in November in every year, with a power reserved to each state to recall its delegates, or any of them, at any time within the year, and to send others in their stead for the remainder of the year. So, you have to be at Congress, which met in several places during this time, the first Monday of November. But if the state decides you're not going to stay there, they can call you back and send someone else, if they feel like it.
So I will get to that later. But how many? Is it one per state, or was it how does it work?
That's the next paragraph, because
Okay.
it's wild, this decision. No state shall be represented in Congress by less than 2, nor by more than 7 members. And no person shall be capable of being delegate for more than 3 years in any term of 6 years, nor shall any person, being a delegate, be capable of holding any office under the United States for which he or another for his benefit receives any salary, fees, or emolument of any kind. So, how big is each state's delegation? Somewhere between 2 and 7. Who decides that? The state. How? Yeah. How long can you be a delegate? Not more than 3 years in any term of 6 years.
So they were term limits back then.
There were term limits back then, which I have feelings about term limits. I will say that nobody in this system of government could make the government work, so it doesn't really matter that nobody knew what they were doing. But yeah. Like, what everybody knew was, this doesn't work. And beyond that, what was there to know? But this all may be part of why the office of the President of Congress turned over so quickly, because this is a fairly loony system, and theoretically the state has just as much power to pull back the President of Congress as anyone else, which they can do for any reason. And neither can the delegate receive a salary or anything under the United States, but another for his benefit probably means your slaves can't work for the government either, if they're getting paid, or you're getting paid for their work, more accurately. You can't rent your slaves to the government.
Well, if they do anyways. Like, here, this slave's gonna be my representative today. No.
Yeah. No, let's see. Each state shall maintain its own delegates in a meeting of the states, and while they act as members of the committee of the states. Translated, the state has to pay everybody's salaries. They are not receiving a federal salary.
Because the federal salary, all 15 states would have to agree on it.
Yeah. The state can decide how much people are getting paid if they're getting paid. Could decide to make them all volunteers, and it's all going to vary from state to state.
So this is why Washington and his army had trouble getting paid during the Revolution, because they couldn't agree on it.
Yeah, the Continental Army was the big testing point of the Articles of Confederation, because that was something where, I'm not going to say everyone supported the army, but everybody who supported the idea of the United States as a country supported the army. But no state wanted to be the only one to pay for the army. And the little states wanted the pay to be divvied up based on population, and the big states wanted it to be each state gets a set percentage that they're responsible for. Congress couldn't tax anybody to raise the money, and when the states just didn't pay, which was what ended up happening, Congress couldn't do anything about that. So in the 10 years after the signing of the Articles of Confederation, soldiers basically were getting paid poorly and randomly. And that was one of the causes behind Shays's rebellion, in fact.
Plus, I think at this time, I might get to it later, but I think at this time, each state pretty much had its own currency too.
Yeah. In these days, individual banks could have their own currency. There was no standardized currency. And some places were using Spanish currency, and some places were still using British currency. And the financial system of the United States, and I am not an expert because this is economics, and I didn't learn a lot of economics in school for reasons, but the economic system of the United States under the Articles of Confederation was what the technical term is a hot mess. And that was one of the handful of things where everybody knew it was going to have to be overhauled if the country was going to continue to exist. And if the country didn't continue to exist, then the colonies were going to get snapped back up by European powers, and they all knew it. So the currency had to get fixed.
Yes.
And then the worst clause in the entire article is right here. In determining questions in the United States in Congress assembled, each state shall have one vote.
So not only the states have to agree, each individual, each of the 2 to 7 delegates have to agree for one vote.
Every delegation had to agree to cast its vote. And every state could override any other state's vote by vetoing. This is a document that was written to fail. I don't think that's what they were doing when they wrote it. I think they were trying to give people what they wanted, but it turns out what they wanted was bad and they should feel bad. And then, kind of at random in this section, freedom of speech and debate in Congress shall not be impeached or questioned in any court or place out of Congress, and the members of Congress shall be protected in their persons from arrest and imprisonments during the time of their going to and from and attendance on Congress, except for treason, felony, or breach of the peace. You can't be arrested for murder on your way to Congress.
Are you sure that's not currently still in process?
It only applies to members of Congress. So, and Congress has the power to do something about it if they actually get their act together. So, yeah.
So,
but yeah, basically, it's the people in Congress are allowed to say whatever the hell they want to and not get arrested for it. And if they are in Congress or on their way to and from Congress, which, as established, is going to take you a while, you can't arrest them unless they've actively... Well, I guess felony would be murder, but you can't arrest them for, like, jaywalking or whatever.
Oh, so they will get arrested for murder.
It looks like, yeah, felony would include murder.
Okay, I was saying, like, you can murder someone to the Congress?
But breach of the peace. So you can't be arrested for... I mean, I'd argue you can't be arrested for sedition. But unless, you're actively riling people up at the moment. But yeah, it's basically like, look, people going to and from Congress have to go to and from Congress in order to make this not at all functional government pretend to function. Leave them alone. So, yeah. Article 6, which is actually some limitations on states.
First state limitations.
It's the first state limitations we've gotten to here, and we're on Article 6. No state, without the consent of the United States, and notice that United isn't capitalized, but state is, so it's basically saying all of the other states, not the country, in Congress assembled, and Congress also isn't capitalized, shall send any embassy to, or receive any embassy from, or enter into any conference, agreement, alliance, or treaty with any king, prince, no comma, or state, nor shall any person holding any office of profit or trust under the United States, or any of them, except if any present emolument, office, or title of any kind from any king, prince, or foreign state, nor shall the United States in Congress assembled, or any of them, grant any title of nobility. So that's a lot. And it's one sentence. So basically what we're looking at here is no individual state is allowed to negotiate with any foreign power on its own. They can only negotiate as a country.
All right.
And no one who works for the United States or for any individual state can accept anything from a king, prince, or foreign state. And the country and the individual states are not allowed to grant titles of nobility.
So those states, but all the states have to agree on this, whatever they right. They all have to agree on it.
Yeah. The articles had to be ratified. And Maryland held out for 2 years under a procedural detail, but they did agree that, yes, this was the rule that they were all going to accept. And even Maryland eventually joined. So they did all agree that, yeah, no titles of nobility, no accepting anything from foreign governments. The idea of no present got loosened a certain amount, because if, Queen Elizabeth II had wanted to give a president a birthday present, like, if Charles wanted to give Biden a copy of his crappy book about alternative medicine, Biden is allowed to accept that. I personally wouldn't, but he's allowed to. But it's basically agreed that if it's anything of value, it's not something that can be accepted under the United States laws. This came up a lot during the previous administration. The emoluments clause. Because I don't know what the previous administration would have had to do with receiving things from foreign governments. Anyway, no two or more states shall enter into any treaty, confederation, or alliance, whatever, between them without the consent of the United States in Congress assembled, specifying accurately the purposes for which the same is to be entered into and how long it shall continue. No trade pacts between two or more states against the rest of the country.
Yeah. So Massachusetts and Rhode Island couldn't trade with each other, not trade with anybody else.
Right. If Rhode Island and Connecticut decided that it's the two smallest states that were going to pair together against everybody else and have, tariffs from any other state stuff coming into their two states, or they were going to go to war against Massachusetts or whatever, they're not allowed to do that without the agreement of all of Congress, which Massachusetts would invariably say no to, because, yes. So in practical terms, this meant that they couldn't enter into treaties and things with one another. No state shall lay any imposts or duties which may interfere with any stipulations and treaties entered into by the United States and Congress assembled with any king, prince, state in pursuance of any treaties already proposed by Congress to the courts of France and Spain. So if
Georgia decided they were going to nudge over the border a little bit into territories controlled by France or Spain. They weren't allowed to do that because it would get in the way of territories. It would get in the way of the treaties that the U.S. was trying to have so that they could defeat the English, which was still a slightly pressing concern at the time.
Yep.
Right, well, I don't know. That's okay. I've got hands there.
No vessels of war shall be kept up in time of peace by any state, except such number only as shall be deemed necessary by the United States in Congress assembled for the defense of such state or its trade, nor shall any body of forces be kept up by any state in time of peace. Found out where all those commas from the last one went. Except such number only as, in the judgment of the United States, in Congress assembled, shall be deemed requisite to garrison the forts necessary for the defense of such state. But every state shall always keep up a well-regulated and disciplined militia, sufficiently armed and accoutred, and shall provide and constantly have ready for use in public stores a due number of field pieces and tents, and a proper quantity of arms, ammunition, and camp equipage. This is basically the formation of the National Guard.
Was there that they have any power, National Guard?
Well, again, within their own states.
Pretty much like a state militia almost.
Yeah, it's a state National Guard.
Yeah.
It's saying that, you could only have the amount of standing army and standing navy that Congress says you can have. But you have to do it. You've got to have a well-regulated and disciplined militia. And you've got to provide for them in case they're needed.
Okay.
This would sort of shift into the Second Amendment, but this is, I have to say, much better worded than the Second Amendment.
Like how?
Well, it's saying exactly what these people are for, exactly what has to be provided for them, and exactly the purpose of the militia. It's not just saying, yeah, you can have guns because militias. It's saying, you will have a militia because defense. And the militia is under the authority of the state. And also, tents are nice. Second Amendment doesn't mention anything about tents.
Yeah, where's the tent? Where's the freedom to set up your own tents?
Exactly. No state shall engage in any war without the consent of the United States in Congress assembled, unless such state be actually invaded by enemies, or shall have received certain advice of a resolution being formed by some nation of Indians to invade such state, and the danger is so imminent as to not admit of a delay till the United States in Congress assembled can be consulted. Nor shall any state grant commissions to any ships or vessels of war, nor letters of marque or reprisal, no privateers, except to be after a declaration of war by the United States in Congress assembled, and then only against the kingdom or state and the subjects thereof against which war has been so declared, and under such regulations as shall be established by the United States in Congress assembled, unless such state be infested by pirates, in which case vessels of war may be fitted out for that occasion, and be kept so long as the danger shall continue, or until the United States in Congress assembled shall determine otherwise. Which again, that's one sentence.
So like Georgia couldn't go like, I'm declaring war on France for
right.
But they invaded. They can.
Yeah. If France had invaded Georgia and they knew there was no time to send news back to Congress and say, hello, Frenchmen invading our country, help, they could fight back, but they could not launch their own war.
Of course, then of course that's even then at that point all the states have to agree to declare war to
Right,
help
which,
Georgia.
yeah, so basically I'd wait until I were being invaded too. I will note that they only have to have received certain advice of a resolution being formed of Native American uprising. Which seems kind of deliberately vague to
Now,
me.
is this the Native Americans in their own state, but not out of their state?
Well, it says to invade, but I would imagine that that's another rule that kind of would get ignored in the moment.
Like,
Again,
I thought like uprising would be if it was uprising, it would be in their own borders.
yeah, to my knowledge, this never came up. Well, uprising would be within their own borders, but invasion, I strongly suspect that it would be counted as an invasion even if they were the people who were in that area before colonization. To my knowledge, this never really came up, but I think the intent is pretty clear there. It is interesting to note, letters of marque or reprisal are how you get privateers. Privateer is state-sponsored pirate. There have been any number of very famous ones throughout history. Captain Kidd was for a while a privateer. Sir Francis Drake was a privateer for a while. A lot of privateers. And it was basically a cheaper way of waging naval warfare.
Privateer, that's a government-sponsored pirate, right?
That's a government-sponsored pirate. You give out a letter saying, by the authority vested in me by, the state of Delaware, you have the authority to go and attack the vessels of, well, at this point, let's be realistic, it would be England, in the name of the United States. And then your privateer would get to keep all the money and trade goods and cannon and whatever else it was on the ship that they wanted. And they would be fighting British ships for you. And there were some gray areas because, in theory, your privateers could only attack the ships of the country you were at war with. And once they started attacking, say, French ships instead of just British ones, hi, you've got a pirate on your hands. But, in theory, the Articles of Confederation explicitly permit privateers. And if your state is infested by pirates, you can send war vessels after them. But Congress has to agree that you're infested.
All 13 states had to
All
agree.
13 states have to agree that you're infested by pirates.
They're like Georgia's like, you know what? I don't believe you are. So no.
Right. And now I'm picturing Pennsylvania being tented for pirates. Article 7. When land forces are raised by any state for the common defense, all officers of or under the rank of colonel shall be appointed by the legislature of each state respectively, by whom such forces shall be raised, or in such manner as such state shall direct, and all vacancies shall be filled up by the state which first made the appointment. Generals are appointed by Congress. Colonel and under are appointed by the states. Which is not the sensible way of doing that. The sensible way of doing that is, by actual competency. But political officers were a thing in the United States at least through the Civil War. Article 8. All charges of war and all other expenses that shall be incurred for the common defense or general welfare and allowed by the United States in Congress assembled shall be defrayed out of a common treasury, which shall be supplied by the several states in proportion to the value of all land within each state, granted to or surveyed for any person, as such land and the buildings and improvements thereon shall be estimated, according to such mode as the United States in Congress assembled shall from time to time direct and appoint. The taxes for paying that proportion shall be laid and levied by the authority and direction of the legislatures of the several states within the time agreed upon by the United States in Congress assembled. So basically, what we've got here is Congress is going to determine how much your state is responsible for paying in taxes for the common defense or general welfare. The state is going to figure out how those taxes get paid. This is clearly a fair and reasonable system that will never go wrong.
And if they pay to begin with.
If they paid to begin with, which, spoiler, they won't. Article 9. The United States in Congress assembled shall have the sole and exclusive right and power of determining on peace and war, except in the cases mentioned in the 6th article, which is, pirates and invasion, of sending and receiving ambassadors, entering into treaties and alliances, providing that no treaty of commerce shall be made whereby the legislative power of the respective states shall be restrained from imposing such imposts and duties on foreigners as their own people are subjected to, or from prohibiting the exportation or importation of any species or goods or species of goods or commodities whatsoever, of establishing rules for deciding in all cases what captures on land or water shall be legal, and in what manners prizes taken by land or naval forces in the service of the United, I assume that's supposed to be states, shall be divided or appropriated, of granting letters of marque and reprisal in times of peace, appointing courts for the trial of piracies and felonies committed on the high seas, and establishing courts for receiving and determining finally appeals in all cases of captures, provided that no member of Congress shall be appointed a judge of any of the said courts. So the Congress has the ability to declare war and sue for peace. The power of ambassadors, the power of treaties and alliances, but no treaty or alliance can screw over the states in the matter of their own commerce. The U.S. decides who gets land or ships or what have you captured, can appoint privateers during times of peace, and tries pirates and crimes on the high seas. And no member of Congress can be a judge, which seems fair to me.
We got 3 pairs of headphones back here. We're missing.
Oh, Christ, I hope this isn't all one sentence. Okay.
Got to break it up a little bit.
Right. This is a long one, kids.
Well, someone needs to go back to grammar school, I guess.
The thing is the 17th century was much laxer when it came to ideas of maybe sentences should end sometime. As long as you divided up all of your clauses within the sentence could go on for days. So let's
try your best.
Yeah, let's see if I can get this by clause here, because this is a long one. The United States in Congress assembled shall also be the last resort on appeal in all disputes and differences now subsisting, or that hereafter may arise, between 2 or more states concerning boundary, jurisdiction, or any other cause whatever, which authority shall always be exercised in the manner following. Okay, we've got a period. Let's stop here. So, Congress settles disputes between the states. Now that's going to get tricky, as we will discover in the decade following this, but there's a book called How the States Got Their Shapes that talks a lot about these weird little niggling conflicts, mostly caused by bad surveying between the states. The Mason-Dixon line was part of this attempt to make the state boundaries make sense.
But that was after that was the 1820s, after all this.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is even during this era, Congress had to step in occasionally and go, okay, back up, because the reason it took Maryland 2 years to ratify was that Maryland wanted all of the states to agree. Technically, under most state charters, most colonial charters, their land stretched to the Pacific Ocean.
Oh yeah, anything past the
Ohio
Appalachians.
River.
Anything past the Appalachians is ours.
Right. Well, it was anything past the Ohio River was what Maryland wanted the states to cede to the federal government. But yeah, technically, if you look at the original charter of Virginia, Pennsylvania, what have you, you've got these straight lines stretching all the way across the continent.
Well, I think at the time it was just to the Mississippi, because that's what we got in the war.
According to the original charters. So we're talking, 1600s here, to the Pacific Ocean. This was unenforceable by any conceivable stretch of the imagination.
Because technically, was anything past the Mississippi at this point still either French or Spanish at this time?
Yes, it was. Parts of the West Coast were actually claimed by the Russians. There's a Russian fort in Northern California. I was there as a small child. I don't really remember it. But yeah, so basically this is saying the states have to let Congress be the final authority on borders. And that is, I think, part of trying to keep the states from going to war with one another, which did happen a few times over the years. Even though it's explicitly illegal by both the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. Okay, so where's our... There we go. Whenever the legislative or executive authority or lawful agent of any state in controversy with another shall present a petition to Congress stating the matter in question and praying for a hearing, notice thereof shall be given, by order of Congress, to the legislative or executive authority of the other state in controversy, and a day assigned for the appearance of the parties by their lawful agents, who shall then be directed to appoint, by joint consent, commissioners or judges to constitute a court for hearing and determining the matter in question. So far, so good. 2 states in conflict over a small hunk of land send a petition to Congress, which says, okay, we're going to appoint a commission. You, state A, pick your people. You, state B, pick your people. And then you get together and you both appoint people to make this decision from your state so that you're making the decision together. So far, so good.
But did that work?
Sometimes. But if they cannot agree, Congress shall name 3 persons out of each of the United States, and which I doubt that's going to be a fair and equitable chance at being one of the 3 people named, because if they don't know who you are, you're not getting picked. And from the list of such persons, each party shall alternately strike out 1, the petitioner's beginning, until the number shall be reduced to 13. And from that number, not less than 7, nor more than 9 names, as Congress shall direct, because God forbid we have, settled numbers of anything in the Articles of Confederation. As Congress shall direct, shall, in the presence of Congress, be drawn out by lot, and the persons whose names shall be so drawn, or any 5 of them, shall be commissioners or judges to hear and finally determine the controversy. So always as a major part of the judges who shall hear the cause shall agree in the determination. So here's how we're going to decide the judges if y'all can't agree. There will be a number of them. What number that is, we'll figure it out.
So wait a minute. So if they can't agree, they'll just. But I'm confused. If they can't, so they can't agree, they'll pick the judges. But how they out the power of all 13 states?
Okay, so each state will have, where was it? A certain number of people, 3 people out of each state will have their names put on a list. From that list, whoever brings the complaint gets to strike out one person, and then the people who got the complaint get to strike out another, and so on until you have somewhere between 7 and 9 names left. 13 names left, and then you draw by lot somewhere between 7 and 9, or maybe just 5, to finally make the decision. And if either party shall neglect to attend at the day appointed, without showing reason which Congress shall judge sufficient, or being present shall refuse to strike, the Congress shall proceed to nominate 3 persons out of each state, and the Secretary of Congress shall strike in behalf of such party absent or refusing, and the judgment and sentence of the court to be appointed in the manner before prescribed shall be final and conclusive. You don't show up, you takes your chances. And if any of the parties shall refuse to submit to the authority of such court, or to appear or defend their claim or cause, the court shall nevertheless proceed to pronounce sentence or judgment, which shall in like manner be final and decisive. The judgment or sentence and other proceedings being in either case transmitted to Congress and lodged among the acts of Congress for the security of the parties concerned, provided that every commissioner, before he sits in judgment, shall take an oath to be administered by one of the judges of the Supreme or Superior Court of the state where the cause shall be tried, well and truly to hear and determine the matter in question according to the best of his judgment, without favor, affection, or hope and reward, provided also that no state shall be deprived of territory for the benefit of the United States. So Congress can't take it away from both of them.
All right.
You can't say, well, if you can't share, then neither of you get it, which, as a parent is a solution I have used a time or two. There's this enormously complicated, I've read it and I still don't fully understand how they're going to decide if things go wrong, and so, but a decision is going to be made. And
so that's funny you said as a parent. Imagine if your kids could override you.
Man,
no, I'm not gonna do that, Mom.
There's a reason we only had 2 kids. We don't want them outnumbering us. But yeah, it's basically saying, look, we're going to make a decision and everybody's going to agree to it, and if you won't show up for it, well, sucks to be you. But in practice, this may not work the way we say it will, not just because this is needlessly complicated. Yeah. Hopefully this won't come up, I guess? Yeah. All controversies concerning the private right of soil claimed under different grants of 2 or more states, because some of the original colonial land grants overlapped. And part of that was, surveying in the 16th century was not great. 17th century. And part of it was, what grant one king issued was not necessarily worried about by his successors. Whose jurisdictions, as they may respect such lands, and the states which pass such grants are adjusted, the said grants of either of them being at the same time claimed to have originated antecedent to such settlement of jurisdiction, shall, on the petition of either party to the Congress of the United States, be finally determined, as near as may be, in the same manner as is before prescribed for deciding disputes respecting territorial jurisdiction between different states. So, if y'all haven't settled your land grant disputes by now, we'll do it the same way as the last paragraph. Don't make us write all that again. Which is fine by me, because don't make me read all that again. The United States in Congress assembled shall also have the sole and exclusive right and power of regulating the alloy and value of coins struck by their own authority. Not that they really had much authority to strike their own coin, or by that of the respective states, fixing the standards of weights and measures throughout the United States. They actually did keep these standards of weights and measures. That is one of the few powers given to the government under the Articles of Confederation that remains part of the Articles of Confederation of the United States to this day. Like, you can't ask Congress for a letter of marque anymore, but the United States still does handle its own weights and measures. Regulating the trade and managing all affairs with the Indians, not members of any of the states. So, the states negotiate their own way, but Congress handles treaties with Native Americans. Provided that the legislative right of any state within its own limits be not infringed or violated. So Congress makes sure that the states can do what they want to within their borders. Establishing and regulating post offices from one state to another throughout all the United States, and exacting such postage on the papers passing through the same as may be requisite to defray the expenses of the said office. Again, one of the handful of things that was a through line from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution. Appointing all officers of the land forces in the service of the United States, excepting regimental officers. Appointing all of the officers of the naval forces and commissioning all officers whatever in the service of the United States, making rules for the government and regulation of the said land and naval forces, and directing their operations. So in theory, Congress was in charge of the Continental Army. But a lot of the Continental Army was made up of state militias, which didn't owe any allegiance to Congress. So it's all very complicated by the fact that all the states, again, 13 smaller countries in a trench coat.
So each state was fighting on their own, but together kind of at the same time?
Yeah. And this would continue even up through the Civil War. If you study Civil War history, all of the units in the Civil War have things like, the 54th Massachusetts. So any Civil War unit is from a state.
So even the up north, they were state thing, not just the south thing.
Yeah.
The north.
Yeah. And they were all theoretically under control of the United States Army, but they were divided by state. All of the people in your unit were from your state. Most of the people in your unit were from your town. Which was devastating for a lot of small towns.
So were all the states fighting separately, or they all work under Washington?
Yes. In theory, Washington was the commander-in-chief. He had been appointed to that position by Congress. Now, to be strictly fair, part of why it didn't work that way in practice was communication. It's hard enough now being in control of an entire military that stretches an area the size of the 13 colonies. It was flatly impossible in the 1770s and 80s. There was just no way.
They didn't use the satellite to communicate back then?
Yeah, Washington's cell phone plan wasn't very good. But it was also the case that some states were provisioning their soldiers better than others. Some of them were paying them differently than others. Some of them were expecting Congress to pay. It was not, the closest we got to any kind of organization was actually when Baron von Steuben came in and worked to make the government professional, which means that the professional nature of the original Continental Army was put in place by a gay German aristocrat. So that's fun.
And plus, the soldiers, if they went to the other state, they couldn't use their money in that other state.
Right. They would have to exchange money, which was often easier said than done. It was a lot. It was very complicated. It was very hard to maintain. This is a document that is written to fail. Even if that wasn't the actual intent, that was in practice what is going on with the Articles of Confederation. They cannot succeed in successfully running a country. So naturally, the Confederate States based their governing model on the Articles of Confederation instead of the Constitution. Because if they had learned anything, they wouldn't have seceded from the United States.
Oh boy.
Yeah. The United States, in Congress assembled, shall have authority to appoint a committee to sit in the recess of Congress, to be denominated a committee of the states. The number of committees that were a thing at this time. People think that is a modern issue, but no. There's a bit in 1776 where they're listing all of the committees that existed in Congress at the time, and it is a lot. And there were just not that many guys in Congress. Let's see. And to consist of one delegate from each state, and to appoint such other committees and civil officers as may be necessary for managing the general affairs of the United States under their direction, to appoint one of their number to preside, provided that no person be allowed to serve in the office of president more than 1 year in any term of 3 years. So this is, president of Congress here. To ascertain the necessary sums of money to be raised for the service of the United States, and to appropriate and apply the same for defraying the public expenses, to borrow money or emit bills on the credit of the United States, which will not be very good credit, transmitting every half year to the respective states an account of the sums of money so borrowed or emitted, to build and equip a navy, to agree upon the number of land forces, and to make requisitions from each state for its quota in proportion to the number of white inhabitants in such state, which requisitions shall be binding, and thereupon the legislature of each state shall appoint the regimental officers, raise the men, and clothe, arm, and equip them in a soldier-like manner at the expense of the United States, and the officers and men so clothed, armed, and equipped shall march to the place appointed, and within the time agreed on by the United States in Congress assembled. But if the United States in Congress assembled shall, on consideration of circumstances, judge proper that any state should not raise men, or should raise a smaller number than its quota, and that any other state should raise a greater number of men than the quota thereof, such extra number shall be raised, officered, clothed, armed, and equipped in the same number as the quota of such state, unless the legislature of such state shall judge that such extra number cannot be safely spared out of the same, in which case they shall raise, officer, clothe, arm, and equip as many of such extra numbers they judge can be safely spared. And the officers...
That was green.
Yeah. Huh?
What?
So what this is saying is, here's how we're going to run our army.
The federal army. Cool.
The federal army, which we're making up out of bits from the states. And if the states don't think they can raise the number of men that we're asking them to, they'll get close enough. So that's going to go well. And the officers and men so clothed, armed, and equipped shall march to the place appointed, and within the time agreed on by the United States in Congress assembled. So Congress is going to set the rules, say how many men they need, how they need to be equipped, and then the states will actually do it if they feel like doing it. And it's going to be in proportion to the number of white inhabitants. The word is actually in the text.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's fine.
So basically, can you translate that a little bit?
So basically what it's saying is Congress is going to put together a committee in the recess of Congress that figures out how the army is going to be run. So it's not going to be all of Congress. It's just going to be 13 guys. And they are going to run the army, including trying to get the apportions out of the various states. So these 13 guys, it's their job to try to make the states do anything for the army. They will appoint the officers, except for the regimental officers, which will be appointed by the regiments themselves. The legislature of the state will appoint the regimental officers, raise the men, clothe, arm, and equip them in a soldier-like manner, but at federal expense, except the expense for doing it is going to come from the states. So I can't explain how that's going to work, because the short answer is it won't. A lot of this is, we know that this has to be centralized in order to work, but we also know that we can't centralize things because it's going to piss everybody off. This is flatly untenable, this whole thing. And I know I keep saying that, but if you really listen to some of what's being said here, it's inherently contradictory. It's, the government is going to do these things, but only if the states say it's okay. I'm like, okay. So, yeah. The United States, in Congress assembled, shall never engage in a war, nor grant letters of marque and reprisal in time of peace, nor enter into any treaties or alliances, nor coin money, nor regulate the value thereof, nor ascertain the sums and expenses necessary for the defense and welfare of the United States, or any of them, nor emit bills, nor borrow money on the credit of the United States, nor appropriate money, nor agree upon a number of vessels of war to be built or purchased, or the number of land forces to be raised, nor appoint a commander-in-chief of the army or navy unless 9 states assent to the same, nor shall a question on any other point, except for adjourning from day to day, be determined unless by the votes of a majority of the United States in Congress assembled. So they've got to have at least 9 states say yes to doing anything. So
this one was in a full 13, had only 9 states at the end of this thing.
So if 5 states don't have delegations there, nothing gets done, is what this one is basically saying. They have to have 9 yes votes. They have to have a majority of the votes for the other things. But we haven't gotten to the veto part yet.
Oh, joy.
Yeah. The Congress.
So even if 9 states agree to it, one other state vetoed it and still wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Congress of the United States shall have the power to adjourn to any time within the year and to any place within the United States, so that no period of adjournment be for a longer duration than the space of 6 months, and shall publish the journal of their proceedings monthly, except such parts thereof relating to treaties, alliances, or military operations, as in their judgment require secrecy. And the yeas and nays of the delegates of each state on any question shall be entered on the journal when it is desired by any delegate, and the delegates of a state, or any of them, at his or their request, shall be furnished with a transcript of the said journal, except such parts as are above accepted, to lay before the legislatures of the several states. All of this has to be written down. Any of the delegates can request a copy of the proceedings to give to their states. Congress can adjourn whenever they want to, and to anywhere they want to, but it can't be for more than 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So they can go home, just, not for more than 6 months of the year.
So basically they had to do something. They had to at some point they had to go and do their quote job.
They have to be there. They don't have to be doing anything, but they have to be there at least 6 months of the year.
Do we have that kind of thing now, or is it
Yeah, we have the same basic thing. And there's some talk about, wouldn't it make more sense to have it be virtual? Because we can do that now.
Congress via Discord messages.
Yeah, it's theoretically doable. And frankly, that would enable the expanding of Congress, because the number of people per representative has been steadily, well, not steadily, but mostly steadily going up the entire time we've been a country.
Was it not like 100, 200,000 people?
I would have to look it up. I would have to look it up to know what it was and what it is. But it says in the Constitution, it shall be no more than such and, no less than such and such. And that was how many there were per representative when the country started. And if we kept going so that...
And this was before the world hit 1 billion people.
Oh, yeah. And when there were still only 13 states. If we kept going so that the number of people each representative served remained the same as it was on day one of this country, Congress would have to meet in an arena. Because it would be so big.
Time to tear down and rebuild the Capitol building.
There's not room on Capitol Hill. Not unless they made a skyscraper. Yeah. So that's a whole other conversation. But you note that in the Articles of Confederation, there's really no such thing as your representative. There's the somewhere between 2 and 9 people who represent your state. But your state legislature chooses them. You don't have a voice. And they don't represent you. They represent your state and whatever your state legislature thinks are the state's interests. And most of the people in your state didn't get to select their legislature either, because, even today, most of the people in any given state are women and children.
So the state representative, the state Congress, or so say, is one that points these things.
Yeah.
So kind of like how before that was it? I forget what the amendment was.
Senators who were originally appointed by the legislature,
but unlike the senators, these people don't have any real power to do anything.
Right. Article 10, the committee of the states, or any 9 of them, shall be authorized to execute in the recess of Congress such of the powers of Congress as the United States and Congress assembled, by the consent of 9 states, shall from time to time think expedient to vest them with, provided that no power be delegated to the said committee, for the exercise of which, by the Articles of Confederation, the voices of 9 states and the Congress of the United States assembled is requisite. So if Congress is not in session, if 9 states representatives get together and say, hey, we need to do a thing, as long as that thing is permissible under the Articles of Confederation and all 9 of the states agree on the thing, they can do the thing.
And did they usually agree?
No. Article 11. I can read Roman numerals. Canada, acceding to this confederation and joining in the measures of the United States, shall be admitted into and entitled to all the advantages of this union, but no other colony shall be admitted into the same unless such admission be agreed to by 9 states.
So if Canada wants to come in, they get a free pass.
Right. Because there was this belief that it was in Canada's best interests, and whether or not this is true depends on who you talk to, but that it was in Canada's best interest to leave, to stop being a British colony and to join the United States.
And obviously they disagreed.
They disagreed, and in fact, the king is still on their currency.
I like so they did quote Canada would have been the 14th colony.
Yeah.
Or state.
Canada would have been one of the states.
Not even like Quebec or Montreal.
Well, they didn't really want Quebec because it was French and Catholic, and they were not fond. But not even like Toronto and Nova Scotia and whatever. Canada.
You're all one person, one people.
Yeah.
That'd be that's like a up north. I forget what the population was, but that'd be like a big state, but with very little population.
Yeah. I forget what percentage of Canadians live within 100 miles of the American border, the US-Canada border. And I mean, we're not even talking Alaska in this calculation here. But it is a vast percentage. I think it's more than 3/4 of all Canadians live within 100 miles of the US-Canada border.
Yeah, I think like most of them live on the south end. Not the north end's a little bit less populated.
It is a bit sparse.
Until the Yukon got the gold. Up there then.
Yeah. And even then, the Yukon is very sparsely populated. It's just there were people who came and looked for gold and then went, "Oh, it's gold here," and left again.
Gold's gone. Going home.
Yeah. Well, like if you look at California, which I know a fair more about than I do about the Yukon gold rush for reasons of having grown up in California and not the Yukon. When California was divided into states, or into counties, excuse me, every county had the same population. And so you can tell where the gold rush was by looking for all the little tiny counties. And now most of those counties do not have populations much larger than they did in 1850. And San Bernardino County and Los Angeles County are enormous. San Bernardino County is larger than several states.
But unlike Yukon, they stayed after the gold rush was done.
Right. Well, that's the thing, is that the gold rush counties all still have fairly, except San Francisco, but most of the gold rush counties still have fairly small populations relative to the huge counties that didn't have big populations during the gold rush. Because there's not a lot of gold in LA.
So basically, the gold rush populations are descendants of the population now. There's like gold rush descendants still living there.
Some of it, yeah. Well, I mean, some places also have like, pot farmers and what have you. But a lot of people came out to California for the gold rush, stayed for a year or two, and then left again. And the climate of, a lot of those little tiny California counties is much nicer than the climate of the Yukon. But they were only there to see if they could get rich, and when they didn't, they went home again. Yes, there were people who stayed, but a lot more went home again or moved somewhere else. If the movie industry hadn't come to Los Angeles almost certainly would have dried up. I finally found out why they had a city there. It was because they had an oil boom in the 1920s. So LA got big off of oil. And if it hadn't been for things like, shipbuilding and the war industry and the movies, LA probably would have gone back to being a little nowhere frontier town. Because boomtowns bust. It's part of a cycle. So yeah, so Canada could have been the 14th state. All of it. Article 12. All bills of credit emitted, monies borrowed, and debts contracted by or under the authority of Congress before the assembling of the United States in pursuance of the present Confederation shall be deemed and considered as a charge against the United States for payment and satisfaction whereof the said United States and the public faith are hereby solemnly pledged. This is another one that got messy. This is saying that if the United States accepted credit before the Articles of Confederation, the United States still owed that money as a country, not as individual states. But again, there's no power to tax in this document.
Because they just got through with the taxation representation, even though they had representation now, they still don't like taxes.
Yeah. The basic fact is the colonists didn't like paying taxes. It's true that no taxation without representation was unfair, but it's also true that they weren't paying those taxes anyway. A lot of the more prominent members of the colonial United States were involved in one way or another in smuggling. And so they didn't want an authority, even one considerably closer to them, that they had some say in, being able to levy taxes on them. Even the states were limited, most of them, in their ability to tax. So they have all of these bills that, like, yes, this is on us and our credit and we're taking this and so forth. We don't have any money.
Okay.
So that got very complicated. And it's one of the things that led to the French Revolution, was we got all this money from France and could not pay any of it back.
And that's how the same thing, that's we could pay them back. Just like the 7 years / French Indian Wars, why they started attacking us to begin with.
Yep. France basically bankrupted itself to own the British in the Revolutionary War. Because that's why they were helping us. It was not out of any great love of Americans and their freedom. It was out of a 1,000-year hatred of the English.
The enemy of our enemy is our friend.
Mm-hmm. And to be strictly fair, it hasn't been 1,000 years that they've been fighting, but it's been close.
A few hundred years at least. Probably, I think ever since the Norman invasion.
Yeah. What's a quarter of a millennium among friends?
I think 1,000 years would be more the French-German fighting.
Yeah, no, the whole thing is just messy and complicated. So the United States said, yes, we will take on this responsibility for this money, and they did not have the money to take on the responsibility with.
Oh, I thought something.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if the United States operated like Europe did back in the day, where the states could just invade each other. It's like, this is my state now. You're like Britain and France to invade each other. Germany.
Oh yeah, it would be so much messier if this hadn't constantly been part of our nation's policy.
Like, I claim this Maryland in the name of Massachusetts.
Right. And the thing is it was put as policy because of how weak the country was. It's the, unite or die. Everybody with any real authority in the U.S. knew that the states had to stand together or fall together. If we do not hang together, surely we shall all hang separately.
I remember that quote. I forget who said it.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, so that is why the laws are in place, even as early as the Articles of Confederation, that the states do not get to go to war with one another. Because if they start that, it's not going to end well for anybody.
I can see it now. Massachusetts and Spain teams up with Spain to go to war against France and New Jersey.
Yeah. Article 13. Every state shall abide by the determinations of the United States in Congress assembled on all questions which by this article or this confederation are submitted to them. And the Articles of Confederation shall be inviolably observed by every state, and the Union shall be perpetual, nor shall any alteration at any time hereafter be made in any of them, unless such alteration be agreed to in a Congress of the United States and be afterward confirmed by the legislatures of every state. The Constitution had to be ratified to go into authority. And they let it be by by 9. They let it be the 9 states that are frequently called on. And now I'm looking at it. It may be that it was 9 most of the time and not, it couldn't be 12 against 1. But the smaller states tended to band together and the larger states tended to band together. And it didn't take much to derail things. And it's not like Congress had any authority even without the states banding together to stop things getting done.
Were there also North and South lines being drawn at this time too, or just
the North and South lines were really starting? The slave and free lines, there wasn't any real single division in states the way there would be starting in the early 19th century, because there were multiple divisions, and this is why the founders didn't really think political parties would be a thing, because they considered that a southern farmer and a northern farmer had more in common than a southern farmer and a southern merchant. But in some aspects, the southerners would ally against the northerners, and the slave owners would ally against the they weren't really abolitionists yet. Some of them were, but most of them just didn't have slaves. It was seen that there were so many dividing lines, and the big states against the small states. So Pennsylvania and Virginia would find a lot of common ground simply by being really big. And so the founding fathers, most of them, really did not believe that political parties would found as quickly and determinedly as they did, because they had a hard time believing that you would find anyone who agreed with you on every issue. And what they didn't realize was that good enough would be an ongoing factor. And that, in fact, there have been a lot of single issue voting issues in the history of the country.
And this is what later came up with the two-house system, because the small states wanted something, the big states wanted another thing.
Yeah. A lot of what went into the Constitution was compromised between the small states and the big states.
The small states wanted the Senate, and the big states wanted the representatives.
Right. And there's a certain amount of North versus South compromise. The 3/5 compromise is a North versus South compromise. And, like I was saying, with how you can tell what people argued about by how long the articles are, it's clear they put a lot more discussion into the executive than the legislative, just based on the legislative is like, yes, Supreme Court, let's have one of those. Whereas legislative is like, and he will be this old, and he will have done this and that and the other thing, and here are the rules. You can also read a lot of who was compromising with whom based on some of the rules that were established by Congress. anytime it looks like power is being divided between two groups, that's because it is. That's because they're trying to make a document that both parties in a dispute will agree with. It's the old saying, you can tell a compromise because nobody's happy with what they end up with. And whereas it hath pleased the great governor of the world to incline the hearts of the legislatures we respectively represent in Congress, okay, to approve of and to authorize us to ratify the said Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union, know ye that we, the undersigned delegates, by virtue of the power and authority to us given for that purpose, do by these presents, in the name and in behalf of our respective constituents, fully and entirely ratify and confirm each and every of the said Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union, and all and singular the matters and things therein contained. And we do further solemnly plight and engage the faith of our respective constituents that they shall abide by the determinations of the United States in Congress assembled on all questions which by the said Confederation are submitted to them, and that the articles thereof shall be inviolably observed by the states we respectively represent, and that the Union shall be perpetual. In witness thereof, we have hereunto set our hands in Congress assembled. Done at Philadelphia in the state of Pennsylvania, the 9th day of July, in the year of our Lord 1778, and in the 3rd year of the independence of America. So it took them a year. And then you get the signers and so forth. Many of whom overlapped with signers of the Declaration of Independence, some of whom would later go on to sign the Constitution. There was a lot of overlap in these people. So yeah, so you look at this document and there's some seeds of things that would continue and a lot of things that are designed to fail. You see why they did it, but you know that it was not a good idea.
And so, that's still proceeds today. It's, even though we're more united than we were before, still there's still the battle between what states can do and the federal government can do even today.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, and we've realized that we have to give the federal government at least some power. And how much power that is has been changing back and forth for,
depending on who's in power.
Yeah. Almost 250 years now, it's been going back and forth between whether the power lands with the executive or the legislative.
Yeah, it's like was it, I think it was a year ago, last year, it was 2 years ago now, that the Supreme Court overturned a certain amendment ruling, and each state got their own abortion rules now, and
yep,
and that was like,
yeah, and then we were off to the races. Yeah, but for example, a century ago, Calvin Coolidge basically thought his job as president was to not actually do anything. Like, he literally did not think that he as president should be doing anything. And most of the country seemed to agree with him on that. And then within 20 years, you get the wave that is FDR.
Who did a lot of stuff.
Who did a ton of stuff. It's interesting that the number of people on the Supreme Court has stayed static for as long as it has, given that that's set by Congress, not by the Constitution.
That's another thing to think growing up. It wasn't always 9 either. It wasn't always 9.
No, it was not always 9. It's been 9 for about 150 years now, I think. But there's no real reason for it to be 9.
It's just like it's like Congress has been 435 for like less than 100, about 100 years now.
Yeah. And again, arguably, it should be considerably higher than that. But the thing is I'm pretty sure we've had times where there have been an even number of Supreme Court justices, which is a bad idea. And not just because, there's been stretches where they've needed an appointment in order to fill out the number, but because that was the number we had by act of Congress at that time. And then Congress went, oh, wait, tiebreakers are nice. The Congress is set up with built-in tiebreakers.
And so is the Senate technically, the VP voting.
Yeah. Yeah. But maybe we should have one of those for the Supreme Court. It's the balance of power and the balance of who sides with who and all sorts of things like that have been just continually in flux. I've been threatening for years now to write a 5-paragraph essay that I can post on Facebook whenever somebody's uncle is being an idiot, explaining exactly how the Democratic Party went from being the party of the KKK to the party of the Big Tent. Because, yeah, that changed. And it wasn't an immediate change. It took time. It started mostly with FDR and continued through to about Nixon. But, there's a reason where Strom Thurmond was a member of 2 different parties during his stretch as a senator.
Yeah, even up to more modern times. I forget who it was, but there was I think it was one of the 2008 election or 2004 election. There's a Democrat congressman at the Republican at the Republican Party. I don't know if you remember this one. He says, I forget his name, but he challenged like one of the newscasters to a duel. It was like it still challenged you to a duel.
Yeah. And in the 60s, there were the Dixiecrats, who were the Southern Democrats, who were basically their own party. And, the history of this country has not been one of stasis. I've long said that you can tell who doesn't know much about the Founding Fathers by who treats them as a single unit. I've said it once or twice tonight as a shorthand, but 9 times out of 10, if somebody says to you, the Founding Fathers said or thought or did, they have just proven to you that they do not know anything about the Founding Fathers.
Because most of if I get this a guess here, most of the people who voted on this were probably anti-federalists.
Yeah. And if Alexander Hamilton, who was in the army at the time, he was not a member of Congress yet, but if Alexander Hamilton had said the sky was blue, 3 guys would have gone to the window to check. And shortly after this, Jefferson and Adams would start a fight that would last for years. And I mean, there's the whole Aaron Burr, Alexander Hamilton, again, actual literal duel. Like, the Founding Fathers were not anything like a cohesive unit and never were.
The only thing they agreed on was, I think the only thing they ever agreed on was Britain bad.
Not even that. One of the members of the Continental Congress would not agree to sign the Declaration of Independence because he still hoped that a resolution with Britain was possible. But he left and went to go help prepare the defense of his state because they were actually being invaded by British forces at the time.
So, like you said before, even after this, each one thought of themselves as a member of their state. Like, I'm a Virginian, I'm a New Yorker, I'm a...
Yeah. Even as far as Robert E. Lee, who, had relatives who were involved in this whole thing, But he waited until he knew if Virginia was going to secede or not before deciding which army he was going to be in. And when Virginia seceded, Robert E. Lee joined the Confederate Army. And that is nearly 100 years after the United States had theoretically been one country. 80 and mumble years ago, because it wasn't quite, Gettysburg.
A year or two away. So
yeah.
4 years.
80 and 4 or 5 years later, Robert E. Lee still thought of himself as a Virginian first, an American second. And don't get me wrong, I am not here to defend Robert E. Lee. I am here to use him as an example. The specific unit I talked about earlier when I was talking about the units that fought in the Civil War was the 54th Massachusetts, which is the all-black unit except for the officers because racism, that the movie Glory is about.
Yeah, even today, how do we decide when states should have the power, when federals have the power?
A lot of fighting.
Yeah.
There is a town not that far from me, the town of Sumner, Washington, is named after Senator, I'm pretty sure, Charles Sumner, who delivered a speech on the floor of Congress calling slavery a sex worker. He didn't use that term. And the Southerners who defended her, the people who were paying her money. And he was beaten nearly to death on the Senate floor with a cane.
Oh, I remember that during the peaceful war fight.
Yeah, by another senator on the Senate floor. And then people sent the guy more canes inscribed, "Hit him again." And they named a town.
It was the southern senator that hit the northern senator, right?
Yeah. And then the town of Sumner, Washington is named after the northern senator. But in Oregon, black people were illegal. It was basically just illegal to be black and in Oregon.
And that's up north.
And that's up north, yeah. But also not far from me, the town of Tumwater, Washington is the first town founded by Americans, people from the United States. And one of the founding members of Tumwater was a black man. So the United States has always been really, really complicated that way.
I might be wrong. Isn't it illegal to own an umbrella where you live?
It's not, but it might as well be. My son really wants an umbrella, and I'm like, but nobody here uses them.
It's like, don't say that word here around. We don't say that word around here.
This is absolutely not a joke. I have an umbrella that I only ever use when it's too sunny out. It's waterproof. It was bought, it was made as a rain umbrella, and I use it as a parasol because that is how we roll up here in Washington. Wet is how we roll.
Yeah, I mentioned this before and other things, but I just love the hypocrisy of sometimes between state and federal. Like when the Gay Marriage Act passed, some people were like, let the state decide who can get married or not. But when each state passed the marijuana bill, they're like, that's a federal thing. The federal people should charge this.
Yep. Yeah. I was at a friend's birthday in Eastern Washington last weekend, and that was an interesting experience in a lot of ways because the political divide in Washington follows the line of the Cascade Mountains. So Western Washington and Eastern Washington are very, very different politically.
Yeah, I gotta share a video with you after this stream is over with about Washington.
Mm-hmm. I love my state, but it is 2 states loosely knit together by a mountain range. It's also worth noting that I was on the very, very end of the Scablands, as Dapper Dino viewers will remember from Kent Hovind not understanding.
So are you? Do you live in the East or West Washington?
I live in the West. I live the very southern tip of the Puget Sound, not that far from the state capital. And we are the liberal side of the mountains, but we also have the population. Eastern Washington is about 2/3 of the state, but I drove through Eastern Washington last weekend, and there's a lot of nothing out there. The GPS would routinely say the next exit is in like 15 miles. Oh, right. Farmland and mountains and nothing.
So overall, what's your opinion on this article?
I could see what they were trying to do. And honestly, I don't think the Constitution would have been ratified in 1788. Or 1778, excuse me. It would not have been ratified. The states weren't ready for it. But this is such a flawed document that just cannot succeed as a way to run a country.
So after 10 years of it, they're like, no, this ain't working.
After 10 years of it, they got permission, theoretically, to overhaul it and knew that the first thing they had to do was throw it out and start over.
Yeah, because the overhaul, all 13 states need to agree, and they would probably do that every little thing.
Yeah. Technically, they only needed 9 states to agree. It says in the Articles of Confederation, you only need 9 to agree. But in practical terms, they knew that you needed all 13.
Is that why now, like when an amendment needs to be passed or something, only like 2/3 of this or 3/4 of the states for amendment to...
Yeah. It's generally agreed that getting the entire country to agree on anything is not going to happen. But at the same time, they don't want a simple majority either. So things like constitutional amendments require a supermajority. They require 2/3 plus 1.
Yeah, I forget. It's so much of each state Congress and plus the national Congress too.
Yeah, and technically, Congress can set up however they want to pass an amendment. There's a suggested route, and then it says, or if Congress decides to do something else, we'll do that. But it is very much we need to have the population of the majority of the country because the majority of the country is going to follow this rule. But we can't let any one group hold everything up. Unless it's promotions in the military, which I guess one guy can hold up. So that's good to know. Being a student of history can be really depressing.
Yeah. Yeah. At least we're learning more about our past now.
Oh, yeah. No, and I do think it's all really important to know because, yes, it's true that most of the police organizations in the United States have their roots in slave catching groups and things along those lines. But it's also true that having an organized police force makes the streets safer in theory.
Just like I forget who it was, had their origins in union busting.
Yeah, the Pinkertons. Yeah, no, it's there's a lot of things where it's like, well, yes, but also no. And I feel that about the Articles of Confederation. We did see some good things in here. Hey, let's have a postal service. It's a good idea.
Yeah.
But
But you're glad that you don't have that system still today.
We would not exist as a country if we had tried to keep the Articles of Confederation. As soon as the states felt that they were safe from European invasion, the United States would have fallen apart if we had kept the Articles of Confederation.
I guess I can to see now each state being their own little thing and invading each other.
Yeah, and probably some of them would have joined together in later years for, common defense or for...
Be like New England might be New England. The whole thing of New England might be...
Exactly. Like Italy and Germany weren't countries 250 years ago and are now. So maybe some of the states would have formed their own little countries and, there would be 15 or 20 countries across where the United States is now.
So why do you think that in the South they decided, let's go back to this again?
Well, because they thought that a lot of their problems came from federalism. Because outside forces were being allowed to control whether or not they were allowed to have slaves. Which you will note that no law was passed up until the Civil War banning owning slaves. But the expansion of slavery was being limited, and that wasn't okay either. And that was clearly all outside forces being able to control them, and therefore they needed the Articles of Confederation so that they could each be independent, but they would be loosely allied together in case of, what a lot of them still see as federal invasion. And arguably for their needs, there is a kind of sense there, because I would strongly argue that they weren't thinking past getting union recognition of their existence. I don't think any person involved in the actual formation of secessionist governments was thinking past recognition by the United States. And their confederacy would, their document of confederacy would hold them together if they'd been able to pull it off that long. But they would not have been able to stay under an Article of Confederacy either.
So even if they won the war, they would have to argue their government or fall apart too.
Right. This is not a functional government, because it puts a lot of responsibility on a government that doesn't have any authority to back it up.
Well, thanks for being on today talking about this.
Oh, sure.
Is there any other future articles you want to talk about in the United States or other countries if you have any knowledge about them?
There are a lot of things that I can talk about. I actually do know a wide range of things, not just what academic decathlon when I was in high school referred to as documents of freedom. But we'll figure something out. I'm definitely willing to be on again another time.
Awesome. Well, again, hope you all enjoyed this learning experience. And remember, never stop learning. Enjoy the randomness. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.